us today. My name is Becky Megas, she, her pronouns, and I am the founder and chief care connector for Women in Sustainability. And thank you for joining us as part of our Community Voices series today. This is an opportunity for our members to present on a topic that is around their expertise. And so we're thrilled to have Lisa join us, and I'll introduce her in a second. Women in Sustainability, for those who are new to us, is an inclusive social and environmental justice nonprofit that is dedicated to caring for the people that care for the planet through community, advocacy, resources, and education to create a sustainable and equitable future through the feminist viewpoint and feminist leadership. Women in Sustainability strives to create a safe space for like-minded and diverse individuals to create purposeful connections and conversations. All are welcome in our community. Few items before we get started. As I noted, we're recording today's session. We also have the closed captions turned on, so you can turn those on or off by clicking on the three buttons and either viewing or hiding subtitles, and I'll drop some information in the chat here shortly about that as well. You can change your views, so you can be able to change your views up the top right-hand corner. Lisa will have a presentation, so you can actually do a side-by-side view where you can see her and the presentation. You can also see the gallery and the presentation as well. So you can change that for whatever works best for your viewpoints. We are an inclusive community, and so we work too hard to be inclusive and ask that you change your pronouns. You can do that by renaming yourself and adding in your pronouns, and doing this as you feel most comfortable. Please stay muted during our presentation. I know we've been doing this for a really long time, but just always that reminder to stay on mute so that we're not interrupting our speaker. If you haven't yet and you're just joining us, please open up the chat, say hello, let us know where you're joining us from. If you're having lunch, what are you having? Have you advocated before? Just let us know a little bit about you. And we'll also be utilizing that chat throughout. So if you have questions, you can drop those in the chat. We'll ask those questions to Lisa at the end. Or if you've got anything that you'd like to add in there that adds to the presentation, some additional information, we just ask that you always keep that topic to today's topic about environmental advocacy. And we may have an opportunity to ask some questions at the end where you may be able to unmute yourselves as well. And if you do get to that point, we'll just ask that you raise your hand. So down at the bottom, you'll have reaction icons. You can raise your hand when it's time to ask questions in person, and we'll call on you so that we have no interruption from people speaking over each other. And you can also pop those in the chat, as I noted earlier. In addition, using those icons at the bottom, we love to support our speakers. We know that this is still kind of a weird space that we're in, and we love to provide as much energy as we can to our speakers. So use your reactions down at the bottom to be able to show our speaker some love during her presentation. Be able to, yes, there you go. Give a little heart, give a little applause, high fives, anything that you can just to show a little bit of love, which just provides a little bit more fun for our conversation. You can also repeat something in the chat. If you hear something you like, type it and drop it in the chat. Or if you have your cameras on, click your fingers, not clap, this is click your fingers or clap your hands is another great way to be able to show support as well. And finally, just a reminder that we are all here to learn today. So be kind and courteous to each other in that chat and just in the space all together. With all of that said, now we're going to go ahead and introduce Lisa Cutter, who is joining us today. Lisa earned a BS in marketing from Metropolitan State College of Denver. Lisa's career experience includes working as a public relations consultant with the firm she founded, Cutter Communications. She served as a chair for Women's Bean Project Board of Directors, which describes itself as a nonprofit organization with a mission to change women's lives by providing stepping stones to self-sufficiency through social enterprise. Lisa was elected to serve as the representative for Colorado District 25, and she is currently running for Colorado Senate as well. And we're so thrilled for Lisa to be joining us today to teach us about environmental advocacy and how we can get involved. And so please help me give a warm Women in Sustainability welcome to Miss Lisa Cutter, my friends.
Thank you so much, Becky. I'm so happy to be here. This is my one of my favorite things to talk about. I was as Becky told you, I was a public relations consultant for many, many years before I became a legislator. And so outreach and activism and all those things are really important to me. And I would like to note that I was a founding member of this amazing group. I love women in sustainability. So proud to be a part of this. And yeah, I'm really excited to do more. So I will start right now by sharing my screen. See if we can, oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. There it is. There it is. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing the right thing. I can't. All right. Try this again.
You had it.
I did have it. There's a bar up top that wasn't letting me see what I needed to share there it is. Okay. Maybe.
Click the slideshow again.
It works so well. There we go.
There you go. We got it. We got it.
On rehearsal. That's always the way it is.
And I dropped it in chat. I was going to say you were the second person to become a member of Women in Sustainability. So not just a founding member, but you were at the very beginning.
That is awesome. Well, I'm very proud to support this great organization. So I want to start with a quote by a woman named Erica Chenoweth. If you are dealing with a seemingly impossible situation, by using peaceful methods to struggle for rights, security, and access, know that your bravery and persistence inspire me and the countless others that are watching. So Erica Chenoweth is a woman that she is a PhD, a Frank Stanton professor of the First Amendment at Harvard Kennedy School. And I first encountered her work when I worked on the Women's March, which I'll talk a little bit about down the line. But she really studies social movements. And I think that kind of cues up our conversation today really nicely. So just know going in that what you do really matters. And I'm going to help give you some tools and some tips on how to do it well. So according to Erica, our findings showed that major major nonviolent campaigns have achieved a success of 53%. These include tactics like peaceful protest, getting media attention for issues, non-state actors cooperating with state actors, meaning advocacy from the public, that kind of thing. And she also says a march won't have much effect unless it's translated in continuing organized and disciplined mobilization. So for example, the Women's March, which came out of the 2016, you guys all may know, hopefully, that came out of the election of 2016. That was sort of motivated by that. The continued ongoing pressure is necessary. It's really powerful to do something upfront and visible like that, but pressure on government, collaborative problem solving, and electoral action are all really, really important things that need to follow. If a march inspires, convenes, and energizes, she says, it can catalyze a great deal of change. Very large movements are more likely to translate their goals into real political, social, and political exchange, particularly as they expand their networks into leverage. And there was, I will note that there is also 5.2 million participants roughly in the Women's March. And Chenoweth notes the importance of critical mass. So having a lot of participants in your advocacy. And I think that speaks to sort of the long-term nature of this work as well. So, as you go along, you're going to motivate other people to join, and it's going to continue to grow and to blossom. And she says, she also says transactional solidarity often gives a movement more leverage than a purely domestic movement might otherwise have. Moreover, it can be powerful and emboldening when activism is witnessed by others at home and abroad. So it works. Advocacy works. That's the point here. So when you're starting to think about, what you want to tackle, and it's got something to do with the environment. That's why we're here. But think about, what is your policy and your issue? What is the one thing that you care about? There's so many different things to advocate for, even in this space. I particularly focus on zero waste in my work. But there's oil and gas, there's land use, there's all kinds of issues. So think about what policy you want to talk about. And so what area does this advocacy fall under? And what is the tangible environmental impact? It's really important to think through, through tangible things people can relate to. So I like to, in zero waste, I like to think about how, talk about how we can keep things out of the landfill, and that landfills contribute, I think it's about a third, they're like the third, one of the top three, maybe the third largest contributors of methane to our environment. It can it keeps things out of landfill. It keeps plastic from being created by continually reusing materials. If we rescue them, if we do recycling and follow zero waste policies, we can keep things out of the landfill, and then we can reuse them. So it keeps production down. So that's a contribution. That's an environmental impact. If we keep materials out of the landfill here in Colorado and we can reuse them for materials or for products right here, like glass in Colorado is a closed loop system, for example. So we can use that, then that prevents us from having to transport glass in. That's a tangible environmental impact. So just think through really all the aspects of what you're trying to advocate for. And then, is the solution reasonable? Is it something that seems like it could be done? I mean, there's lots of great ideas that maybe we don't have the technology for, or we don't have the bandwidth for, or there's going to be a lot of pushback for good reason. So think about that. And this is really important. Who are you up against? I think this is something that's really important to me, and especially as a public relations consultant and practitioner. If you think about who you're up against, then you know how to frame your messaging. So, what industries will support and oppose your proposal, and then you can craft that messaging accordingly. So, again, for example, so I didn't explain at the top of this, and my apologies, but I just passed a pretty big piece of legislation called Extended Producer Responsibility. And that's what I'm referencing in a lot of this. And that's making the producers responsible for the trash they create, essentially. And then they will have to pay into the system and fund recycling for everyone throughout the state. So that's it in a nutshell. So when we thought about that legislation, for example, we thought, well, businesses are going to be there. There was a lot of businesses that were on board with us and supportive, and that was fantastic. But there were some businesses and industries that weren't so supportive. And so we had to think about, what messages appealed to them. I mean, the environmental messages that I talked about a couple minutes ago, those were obvious, and that's what I'm passionate about, and that was what was important for me. But that's not always the message that people need to hear, because that's just bringing that's sort of preaching to the choir. So we had to think about who was really going to oppose it and how we counter that messaging. So we talked a lot about supply chains, again, which I mentioned briefly before, about how we reuse materials that we have here, and how this can be an economic driver, and how this could save people money and resolve some supply chain issues by keeping all those great, metal and glass and all those really viable materials out of the landfill, and they could be put to reuse here by organizations, companies creating materials right here in Colorado. Manufacturing. So those are some of the ways that you can think about how you message. And that goes too, if you're advocating to your, to your legislator, that means that typically that's the kind of message that would, and this is all generalization, obviously, but that's the kind of message that would appeal more to my Republican colleagues, where the environmental message might resonate more with the Democrats. So you could always research the legislator a little bit too, your legislator, and figure out, what policies they support and kind of get an idea of their mindset. And then think of your message. So when you're talking about how to specifically advocate to these folks, you can call or write to your legislator. And it's really important to know that you can do that. It's your right. We're there to listen to you. And I hope everyone knows that and feels comfortable reaching out. When you do reach out, keep your asks as specific and concise as possible. There's staff, a lot of times staff are going to be handling these emails, and it's helpful if you can, get to the point and tell them what you're looking for. And ask for meetings. with your legislator if you'd like. If you have something specific to share, or a personal story, or whatever might be relevant, ask to meet with your legislator, and especially if it's your legislator and it's not just somebody that you're advocating to. So, and I should explain, there's lots of ways to reach out to legislators, and lots of reasons why you would. So you might, as we're talking about here, you might talk to your legislator directly, and that's usually the most efficient and effective thing to do. But if you know that there's a vote coming up in a specific committee, and you can look online, our legislature is really easy. And I think there might be people from out of state. Am I right listening? Okay. But in Colorado, it's leg.gov.colorado. And it's very easy to find your legislator and all kinds of information on that website, when it's going to be in a committee, when there's going to be a hearing, all of that. So you might want to talk directly to your own legislator, but you could also talk to other legislators on the committee. If it's going to be heard in the Energy and Environment Committee, you can reach out to all of them with phone calls, emails, all the things that we're talking about here, meetings, and advocate for your policy that way, and push them to vote it through committee. Because if it doesn't get through the first committee, then it's not going to get to the floor where we vote and continue to move the bill forward and eventually pass it into legislation. So let's see. So be open to talking with staff, review the legislation beforehand to see if it's already been introduced or passed or killed, see if there's some kind of history in this specific area, if you have an area that you're interested in. And also make sure you consider the jurisdiction. And by that, I mean, if you're reaching out to, I get a lot of emails from people that are about national issues, that should go to their federal delegation, should go to their congressperson or their state senator, that we really have little to do with. But if there is an issue like that, and you're having trouble reaching your national legislator, you can always reach out to us as a conduit. So you can contact my office, for example, if you want to know how to reach Congressman Neguse, and you're having trouble, we can put you in touch that way. So, and the last thing that I don't have a bullet on here, but the other option that you have here is to testify. You can testify anytime. I can't see hands here because I've got the screen up, and I don't know how I can't do the split screen. But I don't know if any of you have ever testified or considered testifying, but I will tell you, personal conversations and testifying in public to, or testifying in committee or in hearings are really powerful. That's a really, really great tool, because we're here to govern for you. And so when you come with passion and a good story and something to talk about and share with the committee, I think that really, really makes a big difference. And that's the opportunity to testify would be, when I talked about it going to a committee. That's where we first hear legislation and issues, and then it moves on after that. But that would be your opportunity to testify. And it's really, I would have thought it was scary before I became a legislator, to be honest, but it's not. People are typically really friendly and happy to have your voice. We have kids testify. We have all kinds of community members and advocates testifying. And that always makes much more of a difference to me than having, a professional lobbyist or something testifying. So know that your voice is really powerful and really important. So in some ways to kind of channel some of these things, some of these activities, and work through other organizations, is if you were to join a special interest group. So this, I guess, Women in Sustainability would be a special interest group, although you guys really don't do lobbying and that kind of thing. But there's other organizations that are more directly involved in the legislative process and can help drive legislation. They advocate on, there's hundreds of different groups out there that advocate on different specific things. And lots of times legislation will engage many, many stakeholders, we call them, many, many different groups that care about that piece of legislation. So they will help write policy, and they will help write amendments and correspond with lobbyists and other elected officials. They just help us, help the engine churn. So it's really a great idea to get involved with some of those if you're specifically interested in advocating that way. Some examples: Conservation Colorado, the Sierra Club. We work with a lot of experts and advocates on those groups. EcoCycle, who was instrumental in passing this legislation on recycling. Let's see. So, I guess, shoot, what else was I going to mention? Oh, well, these pictures here are about bill signing I had around the recycling bill. And then the one on the left is with a group of advocates that helped with PFAS. I passed some legislation also this session on eliminating these. PFAS are really toxic and dangerous chemicals that we call them forever chemicals. They're in all kinds of consumer products. And so we passed legislation to keep them out of Colorado, or work towards that anyway. And so these groups, you're seeing all these people in these pictures are examples of advocates that helped pass these policies. There's Green Latinos there. I see Sierra Club. There's Inland Ocean Coalition. So all kinds of ways to get involved, all kinds of groups that really help move legislation forward. And I will tell you, it's really, really important. It actually made a difference. So with both of these bills, they were very, very controversial with some. I don't see why. Personally, I think that they all make sense to me. Who doesn't want more recycling? Who doesn't want clean water without, being contaminated by PFAS running off of materials into our water stream and into our bodies, actually? But they can be really controversial and have a lot of pushback. And so all these groups help by rallying people like you on this call and saying, if you're in those networks and you're operating, they're going to say, hey, help us rally for this. Push this out to people, talk to people, write a letter to the governor. At one point, the recycling bill didn't look like it was going to be signed. We were concerned about that. And so we asked people to put some pressure on the governor to sign the bill. And so he got, I don't even know how many, I think literally probably in the high hundreds, if not thousands of emails from people wanting him to sign this bill. And that sort of helped him with the narrative against businesses that were pressuring him to not sign the bill. It made it easier for him to say, listen, look at all this community support I've got. Look at all these voices like yours raising, talking about how important this bill is and pushing me to sign it. So that's a really great example of how advocacy really, really matters. And we did all kinds of tactics around that, which I'll talk a little bit about as well. Let's see. Another tactic that a lot of these groups use and that was very effective is attending a lobby day. So if you get involved in organizations, in fact, even churches do lobby days. There's lots and lots of organizations that do lobby days. And what they do, they'll train you. They'll usually have a little training session and talk to you about how to talk to your legislator and how to articulate your messaging and talk about your policy. And then they'll take you down to the Capitol, and lobbyists get to put in a card calling out legislators. So we'll be in there working and listening to bills, and they'll get to, a professional lobbyist will put in a card and call you out to talk about a bill. And if you can go, you'll go out and chat with them. And lobby days help citizens do that as well. So they'll, give you a little note or something that they'll send in for the representative. And I will tell you that if I'm not busy, if I'm not required to be sitting there and voting on something, if we're debating and I have the opportunity to move around and leave the floor, I will never, never fail to meet with a citizen lobbyist. Because that's our job. We get to see the professional lobbyists all the time, and they're important and helpful, but you're why I'm there. And so that actually is really fun. So it's an opportunity to meet and talk a little bit about what's important to you, and tell your representative why you're there and what you want them to do on behalf of community. And I love that. Kids come and do that a lot. That's one of my favorite things, actually. And I think most of my colleagues would agree with that. You can also attend related community events. We talked about marches, the climate march, the women's march, March for Our Lives. All of that sort of adds up to, to create an impact. You can do highway cleanups, tours of recycling centers. Those are all ways to advocate for something that you really care about. And another thing that I think is an important tool in advocacy is leveraging media. And that means both traditional media and social media. Now, traditional media might not be in everyone's comfort zones quite as much, but it's really important. It's a way, you should think of yourself as an influencer of your own circle, right? Presumably you have people that listen to what you say and that count on you as expert in certain areas, or that value your opinion. And so when you talk to them about something, that really makes a difference. And that's the social media piece. Relevant, fact-checked information. That's a big one for me. I also work some in media literacy. And I think that we're seeing, that's where a lot of our environmental advocacy can go sideways, is people don't believe there's such a thing as climate change and so on. And it's because of non-factual information that's shared broadly and perpetuated, and social media has made that very easy to do. So just be sure to check your information. Even if it sounds like something that you believe is true, that's confirmation bias, right? Oh my gosh, yes, that absolutely. And then you want to go post it, but maybe that one particular story wasn't actually factual. So check that, share fact-based information, share relevant information, share tips, things like that to your social media audiences. And that's one way to really expand your influence and help advocate for the causes, for environmental causes that you care about. And you can elevate events and other opportunities, things that women in sustainability are doing, and try to get people to join you in those kinds of actions. Now, traditional media might be, I'm going backwards here, but I'll back up and say traditional media might not be quite as comfortable for people. But, writing op-eds and letters to the editor is a really powerful way to influence people. And especially if they're articulate and well thought out, you've thought about your messages and you've thought about how you want to be persuasive. And some of the advocacy groups can also help craft these, or help give you some tips, have some tools on how to draft an op-ed. Always check with the newspaper. If you are moved to do this, always check with the newspaper to see what their policies are. So you can, op-eds are usually longer, maybe 600 words roughly, and letters to the editor might just be a couple hundred words. But they'll have policies online available for you to check out. And then, they just submit those, and you can share those on social media as well and leverage that. But that was also really helpful. I think when you look at the context of creating change and sort of what we've talked about, like it's all the things together. It's the marches, it's the advocacy, it's the talking to your legislators, it's the massive amount of emails that are pouring in to advocate for a certain policy that really sort of help persuade in the long run. So if you think about it in terms of that, like lots of letters to the editor can really start getting people thinking in different directions and accepting change. And also use personal stories in any of these examples, really. I'm talking specifically about op-eds and letters to the editor and stories, but really in all the things we talked about before leading up to this, if you can have a personal connection when you speak to your legislator, when you speak to a committee hearing, when you write an email, personal angles are going to mean so much more, because we're all human, right? And that's what we resonate to. I want to know how that impacted you as an individual. If you can tell me something really personal like that and why it matters, anyone would be much more likely to listen and internalize that. So if you do have something that's really powerful, a really great personal story about how this impacted you. Maybe there was an advocate that worked with us on the PFAS bill, the toxins, that was out of Colorado Springs, and she had the most amazing, really heartbreaking story about how PFAS negatively impacted her life. And so that was really powerful. And she was willing to share that and be really raw and vulnerable about that. And that just was so powerful and really helped persuade people, I think. And so if you had a story like that, and there's a reporter that's particularly interested in the PFAS example, there's a reporter at the Colorado Sun named Michael Booth that does a whole, Becky's shaking her head. He does a whole bunch of stuff on PFAS in particular, because Colorado's had some really elevated amounts of PFAS in our water, drinking water, and our lakes. And so it's pretty alarming. And he's really tracked that. So, if you know that and you read him and you follow that issue quite frequently in the media, then that you could drop him a note and say, hey, this is a story about how this impacted me. Reporters are always looking for that, always looking for ways to connect to readers and personal stories, because statistics and facts and all that, facts, but they're very, very important. And we always want to use those to back things up. But if you have that personal angle, that really brings it, makes it come alive for the reader and for the reporter covering that. Let's see. So Malcolm Gladwell, who I have to confess, I've never read The Tipping Point. I don't know if any of, I know, but I mean, the Cliff Notes, I get where he's going with it. And I've always thought that was really powerful. I should actually put that on my reading list, right? Whenever I have time to read. But I always thought the concept of that was really powerful, because again, we're looking at all, and it sort of ties in with what Erica Chenoweth said. We're looking at all these things and how they work together to create change and to sort of pave the way. And I think that as a communicator, I really look at that, about how they all add up and how all small changes really can create a big change over the long term. But it's just consistency. It's just ongoing effort. And so I think that's sort of what he speaks to. He says, when people are overwhelmed with information and develop immunity to traditional forms of communication, they turn instead for advice and information to the people in their lives, to you guys, your circles of influence, whom they respect, admire, and trust. And the cure for immunity is finding mavens, connectors, and salesmen. So you guys can all go out and be an advocate and be a maven or a salesperson for the things that you're passionate about. And that will make all the difference. And that concludes the PowerPoint portion of the presentation. Let's see. I want to stop the screen sharing. Okay. There we go.
That was incredible information and so helpful. And yeah, we're just so lucky to have you, Lisa, currently in the State House, hopefully in the Senate, as a champion for all the policy that you pass every year. So thank you for all of the work that you do and providing this information. We have lots of times for Q&A. Let's use, our expert. Drop your questions into the chat. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question in person. We can have you unmute. Chris did drop a question in a little back. So hold on, let me go back here real fast. Chris says, hi, Lisa, as a legislator yourself, is there a way of reaching out as constituents that is more likely to resonate and have a lasting impact?
That is a great question. Thank you for that question, Chris. So I think that what I said about reaching out to your specific legislator is really helpful. Unless it's like I said, you're reaching out to a committee or something. But if you reach out to your legislator, they're going to more than likely, they'll listen. And it kind of varies. Some people prefer phone and some people prefer email. But I think if you do email, make something very specific and personal. Not we do pay attention to form emails. I don't know if you've all clicked on those, change.org or whatever. I've done those. Email your senator or your congressperson. But and that's great because we do log all those and we consider those, oh my gosh, look at how many people care about this policy. But when you reach out with a really personal email, that's super helpful. And I think also the phone call and talking to an aide, because my aide, that's a great first stop. Because we don't always publish or have easily accessible our cell number for lots of reasons. We get some not as nice people. But my aide can absolutely elevate something for me and say, and this is true of all legislators, and say, wow, Rep. Cutter, I think you really need to talk to this person. They have something really powerful they need to speak to you about, and they can set up a meeting. So I think that can be a really great way to reach out is through the aide. And those office numbers are online, connected to all our offices, super easy to find, and they will respond even if you have to leave a voicemail.
Oh, that's great. What about social media? I know I follow you on social media and keep up at when you said you get some crazy people. Sometimes following your post could be entertaining. But what about social media? Is that something that's a great way to connect with your legislators as well?
Yeah, that actually, thanks, Becky. That is a really good way to connect. Sometimes I'll miss a message every now and then if I don't follow that thing, that particular channel really closely. But typically I will respond to social media. So that's a good way, like the Facebook messaging or Instagram messaging is a good way to reach out to if you have something you want to get my ear about. Good thought. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, no problem. Ms. Harmony, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much, Becky and Lisa, for all of this today. I love all these things. And I was having some connectivity issues, so sorry if you've already addressed this, but I was just curious for bills for next session, are there any climate-related things that you're really passionate about working on?
Oh, I didn't talk about that. Thanks for the question, Harmony. Right now I'm really busy running for office. So usually I'm thinking when it's not an election year, I usually start thinking about things in like July or August and really digging in, like this extended producer responsibility, the recycling bill. We started working on this last August. But I think right now, the policy that's popping up, mostly because it's sort of been in my brain for a while and it's a holdover, is that we need to do something significant on compost. I'm like crazy. Yeah, I'm crazy about compost and the benefits. So I don't exactly know what that'll look like. I need to dig in, so to speak. So we look to advocates whenever I approach policy. I guess this is important to understand too. So, like pressure points and where you can have an influence. So when I approach policy, I will always go to the advocates and really find out the experts in the field. So I really have relied a lot on EcoCycle in particular with this zero waste policy I've been doing for the last several years, because they have really invested a lot of work and resources in this, and they have a vision, and they bring along it's not just them, they bring along a lot of other organizations as well. And so the first thing I do listen to constituents. So if anyone has any great ideas, hit me up for sure. And you guys are all really invested and knowledgeable in this space too. So please, quite seriously, I'll put, we'll make sure I have my contact information. I'll drop that in the chat. But absolutely reach out if you have ideas. And then what I would typically do is vet them through the experts, the advocacy organizations I work with, and say, hey, what about this? The PFAS bill, for example, last year, there's a young woman that's an activist, and that her name is Matvi Chatur, and she's 11, although really she looks like she's about 14, but she's very young. And she has been advocating for environmental policies for a long time. And I met with her and her mother. We're quite friendly. She always supports the work I'm doing. And we met last summer and with her mother and her, and they brought up PFAS then. And, it was sort of vaguely on my radar, but they really brought it front and center. And that is why I started, pursued that bill, that legislation. But I went to the advocates and the experts and said, okay, what can we really do? And it's important to do that because I could have all the good ideas in the world. And as a legislator, I probably am a little more connected, obviously, than I was as a citizen advocate. But any of us can have good ideas. But then when you start to think about, well, has it happened before? Why did it pass or fail? What's been done in this area? What's being done in other states? I mean, there's all this stuff that you want to look at to determine if it's really viable. And so that's, I got that great idea. And then I went and talked to the advocates and they're like, well, this is what we've done in Colorado. They helped me look back and see all the things we've done. And then this is what's going on around the country. And this is what we really think would be feasible. And here's why. And so that's kind of how we approach that.
It's amazing. I'm Maudie's in Women in Sustainability, and she blows my mind of how active she is in the work she's doing to push policy and legacy. She's like, when she goes to college and goes off to do her next thing, I imagined how much she's going to change this world. So question kind of leading off of that is, I have how many bills are you passing a year? So obviously there's lots of materials to cover, many things that would need to be done, but what's realistic of what you can do within that legislative session? Because it's only, your actual session lasts how many months?
4 months.
4 months. So it wasn't
4 months.
Yeah. 4 months.
It's
so within those 4 months. Fair.
So I don't know if that's me specifically or that they were asking how many bills can I pass, or I'll just say generically, people pass, I don't know. It's crazy sometimes to see how many bills people pass. I think I've seen 20 or 30 on someone's list, and that's a lot. And that might be that they're carrying, I think in the Senate, so there's more House members. And so I think that if you're in the Senate, you get more bills coming over from the House. And so you're co-sponsoring over there. So that means when you're not the House of origin, you maybe aren't doing as much heavy lifting. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're partners from the very beginning, but frequently the whoever originates it in their body, they're doing most of the work. And that was certainly true. I had fabulous advocates in the Senate, including Senator Priola, who's a Republican that is very invested in conservation and zero waste like I am. And he did quite a bit, but I really started it and did a lot of work in the House. So I guess so sometimes senators will maybe have more bills because they're picking up more from the House and not doing as much of the heavy lifting. But so really it can vary. I think I passed maybe 11 or 12 bills this year, and that kind of felt a little bit light for me, but it's mostly because extended producer responsibility and PFAS were ginormous lifts. I did 4 environmental bills this year, and those 2 were really, really, really 3 or 4. Anyway, and those 2 were really hard. That was a lot of work and a lot of investment in those bills. And so it kind of depends on how involved you are in your specific legislation, how closely you work on it, how what other experts are involved. So there's a whole bunch of various factors. Did that answer?
Good answered. Thank you. Yes. Glendale, is that how I pronounce it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Go ahead if you want to go off mute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. So I'm really new to becoming an activist. And I mean, I've been an advocate for so long. It's just for a long time, I've only really had my emotions, and I knew there was a lot of things that we needed to pay attention to. But when it comes to the solutions, I'm still figuring that out. And even when it comes to policies and politics, it kind of is overwhelming to think about. But something I've kind of wondered, I live in Las Vegas, so I don't really know how things are in your area, but out here we have a lot of waste and a lot of littering that happens. So, I mean, I know it's kind of like an all over thing, but I just wonder how hard would it be to make it like a federal policy to make littering illegal? Because that should be a crime, honestly.
Oh, that's a good question. Isn't littering illegal? I mean, there are fines and things. I think, I'm just thinking back to a bill. We passed a bill, my first session. It was my first environmental bill. And it was mostly, they worked on it mostly in the Senate, and then I got to sponsor in the House. But it had to do with raising. So when you take trash to the dump, you have something called tipping fees. The haulers do, the trash, companies. And we raised the tipping fees to support recycling grants. But as part of that, we also raised littering fees so that people weren't just motivated, well, I'm not going to tip all this and pay extra. I'm just going to litter, I'm just going to dump some of it off on the road. So we raised fines for littering. So that leads me to believe that, I couldn't tell you exactly, but I'm pretty sure there's fines, and I'm sure this is true all over the country. There's fines for littering. So the problem with stuff like that, though, is that we can't police everything all the time. So you have to be caught. Right. So I think that's what makes things like that. It sometimes can be difficult to enforce. But some of the legislation that I'm working on, and certainly this mirrors national legislation. There's people all over working on these kind of things. The recycling, that should hopefully help. I also worked on Plastic Pollution Reduction Act last year, which will eliminate single-use plastic bags and styrofoam. And I think single-use plastic bags are really a culprit of, litter too. You see them all over the place. So it's just really a combination of a lot of things, I think, that will address that. And honestly, I just think people, and this is where awareness and conversation and advocacy can help. I just think people are kind of careless. And it's because that's the sort of society we become. We're very, convenience, and we're kind of careless about things. And I would love for everyone to know what happens to your trash and how it affects the environment. So all this work that I do as a legislator, and all the work that you do as environmental activists, and then all the conversations that we have with friends and family and other folks, that'll help, I think, hopefully raise awareness and create some change and some understanding of that over the long term.
Yeah, I love that. That was a thank you. Thank you for asking that great question.
Yeah.
And thank you for becoming an activist and getting involved. That's the first big step, is just take one step at a time. So thanks for being a part of it. Jamie, I'm going to go to you next for your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just curious, because of that question, how do you consider equity when you look at these bills and supporting stuff like this? Because I know, obviously littering is not good for our environment, but when we look at stuff like petty fines for things like that, it's going to target low income people of color, unhoused people. So how do you take that into consideration when you're looking at bills and policies and this type of stuff in your work?
Ooh, that is also a really good question. You guys have great questions. So I think when you first said that, I about equity, my mind goes to people, marginalized people and people living in lower income neighborhoods. They're the ones that are going to be most impacted by trash and by waste and by, pollution coming off of factories creating plastic. All those things are going to more negatively impact marginalized communities. So that's how I think of it from an equity lens. But then, I do remember when we were talking about plastic bags and styrofoam, I do remember having some conversations with folks about, costs. We do think about how costs are going to impact people differently. And so, maybe restaurants in more ethnic communities where they may not have as high a margins, operating cost. So, switching from styrofoam might be more difficult. So we always kind of try and talk to as many people as possible and think about how to walk that line. It's not always perfect, but how to walk that line between saying, okay, maybe we give them, maybe we exempt businesses making less than this amount of money, or, I know we did that with the recycling bill. We looked specifically at, we exempted businesses that made less than $5 million annually. So that sort of addresses that kind of thing. And also, I think that when the hope is that again, it's kind of walking that line. It's never perfect, but the hope is that when you kind of continue to create that change, that people, markets are going to change and accommodate that. So they're going to come up with materials that are and containers that are more cost effective and different than styrofoam. It's never a perfect solution, but we definitely look at things through that lens as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. I just like, even recently I was getting more interested in like composting because I looked at it a couple years back, and I go to Red Rocks Community College and we've like tried to do it. And so I reached out because now there's a ton of like door service composting,
Yeah.
and which is great. But I was like, it's hard because if you live in a community where you really do want to like lessen the impact, or you and your neighbor would love to compost, but you can't necessarily afford to have a door-to-door service, or your area is not serviced, and then it costs XYZ dollars even just to go to the dump. It's just like, I wish there was more help, or like, I can't think of the word, but like state funding or something to like help them to say like, oh, here we have this, if you serve this population at a discount, we're going to support you.
100%. I mean, I agree with you 100%. And that's why the recycling bill, the extended producer responsibility, every single residence throughout the state and multifamily, which was really, really important to us, will have free recycling. And we eventually hope to include research and include compost. But sometimes it's really hard. Like there's a, pie in the sky what you want to do. And this is a big bill and a big change in the way we've done things. So it was difficult to include everything we wanted. I would have loved to include compost in that. Love to. So I think it's going to have to be a little more incremental, but yeah, point taken. I mean, I agree. Like it's hard we do a backyard compost, which is imperfect, but.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of listening to different voices, right? You talked a lot about staying in touch with your community and ensuring that you're listening to all the voices that are in your community and not just a certain portion of that. So I think that's a big part of your work.
Absolutely. A huge part of the stakeholder process. And like I said, it's not always perfect. I mean, and we'd love to do, you have to make a lot of compromises along the way, but we always do listen and try to accommodate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Harmony.
Hi. I just wanted to add to about the equity part for the trash and whatnot, that a lot of times these things do become a way to add extra kind of punishments to our unhoused neighbors. So really advocating for trash and recycling at your parks, at your public places, at your bus stops, things like that, so that people, not just our unhoused neighbors, but me as a mom, like I'm always advocating for bathrooms and for recycling and trash in public places and water access from an equity and environmental issue, so we don't have to be bringing plastic bottles and whatnot. And if we don't give people a place to go to the bathroom or throw things away, it doesn't take away the need to go to the bathroom and throw things away. And I think it's really important when we talk to our local and state representatives to be bringing that point up everywhere. And I have lots of very passionate compost advocates, and I was just texting with them right now, and we'll definitely be reaching out to you, Lisa. She was just texting me about how you're one of her favorites and things like that. I'm like, oh, remind me to tell you about this webinar I'm on. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited to tackle compost. So hit me up. I'm going to put my info here right now.
I love that. Thank you, Harmony. Thank you for adding that. And thanks for adding the Waste No More. So those that actually live in the city of Denver, vote next Monday in city council. So a lot of today we're talking about specifically with the state house with Lisa, because that's where she resides. But don't forget to get involved in your local city councils too. That's a great place to start. Show up to your city council meetings, show up to, email your city councilman or council person, and have that conversation with them as well. That's how I kind of got started in my advocacy piece, was going to city council. And it's just a good step forward. Every piece of our system is just as important as the other. City council, state, federal, all of it matters. So make sure that you're getting involved at all levels. Jessica, go to you next.
Hi, thanks, Lisa. This has been really great. One question that I have, and I think that it seems over my long life, I've seen it happen over and over and over, is that there's awesome legislation passed that does not have an educational component. So for instance, that's great that Waste No More hopefully will pass, and the statewide recycling. People suck at recycling, and it's not because they're jackasses. They just don't know. There's no education around it. I mean, I have people put stuff in my personal compost bin in a plastic bag. Like they come by and drop their freaking compost. Recycling in my recycling bin wrapped in a plastic bag. They're not. I mean, so, and it's kind of like with the it's slipping my mind now. What Environment Colorado, the bill they passed last session, I think. But whatever it might be, any kind of waste reduction, recycling, composting, all of those. If there is no understanding about precisely and specifically what goes there into our different bins and what the purpose is behind it, I think that oftentimes it's all for naught. So I don't know. I mean, that is one thing that I have always been really frustrated with the legislative process about, because it's one thing to pass a bill, but if people don't know A, that it exists, and B, what has to happen for the components to be implemented, then it's kind of a wasted effort.
Agreed. And so I'm a communications, professional. Super, super important. You are totally preaching the choir. A couple things. Money. It's very like a massive educational campaign could cost millions of dollars, and we don't have the money to do that. I mean, that's just the fact. But with the bill that I just passed, extended producer responsibility, we actually, that's part of it. They have to educate, people have to be educated. So the fees that they, this whole, it's a pretty complicated bill. So I'm trying to simplify, but when they provide the recycling, when the producers provide this recycling system, they have to provide education. And it will be consistent, because part of the problem in Colorado is that it's inconsistent everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can recycle something in Denver that maybe I can in Littleton or whatever. And so it will provide a consistent system, and it will have to provide education around that. Because I couldn't agree with you more. Huge problem. So that is part of it. Wildfire. I work on wildfire issues a lot. We just passed a bill to provide some more education on Wildfire Awareness Month, and actually put money behind it. Not enough, but more money than they've had before. Because a lot of times, because it is important that people understand the problem and what the solutions might be. And a lot of times we just have to rely on you, outside advocacy, helping raise the issue and talk more about the issue for some of those reasons. News, a lot of times if we're getting a lot of noise from the public, the news will be more likely to pick it up. And then that helps us elevate it as well. So it's kind of complicated, but I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I put note, we are at time. So if anybody needs to run, I understand. I know we could talk about this conversation forever. And I know there was a question about building a website real fast. Is that things that come part of that legislation of having the website? I believe the expanded services or expanded recycling services that is going to go on the bill this November in Denver or in Colorado has education components to it as well. So I think there's lots of times. Yeah, go ahead, please, Jessica.
Sorry, just one really quick thing. I put it in the chat, but I am in chats with a couple folks who are really interested in creating a nonpartisan, and I mean that not just politically, but also with the different nonprofit groups, kind of clearinghouse for this kind of information, where people can go and say, well, how the hell do I actually access get the rebate for putting solar panels on my house in Denver? Because the site is ridiculously hard to navigate, even if you're really motivated. Or what is it that goes into compost, and where is the best place for me to send a donation, whatever it might be. So we're working on that. So if anybody on this call is interested, I'll put my email in here. You're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to loop you in. because we're hoping that while we're looking at starting with Denver, the idea is that we could expand it, across Colorado and then the world.
Love it.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
love it. Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And I'll note too, I get a lot of times, a lot of people say, well, it really should be government that's making changes. And some people say, well, it should be corporations that are making changes. And, it's always been for so long that individuals have been complacent of having to be the changes, right? So, but I think it's all of it. It's not just one. We need every system working together. To Lisa's point, is when these bills pass, then it's our role to engage and involve and get our communities engaged and involved in what's happening. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your family. And that's how we make a difference. Because as we as individuals come in and start creating that change, our voices get louder, and then we can start passing policy. We can start voting with our dollar to corporations, and it all matters.
All of us, you are exactly right, Jessica. We are far past the point. We all have a role, and we all have a responsibility moving forward. And I just feel like that was like so much information. And I'm sure I could have gone on with more and clarified some things. So please hit me up if you want more info or you want further conversation. I'm so passionate about environmental issues and being an advocate. So please feel free to reach out.
And Lisa's so approachable. It's so wonderful to have, you as a part of our community. I have one more question before you go, but I know we are running a little late. So I'm just letting people know, thank you everybody for joining who did join today. Thank you for participating. There was a question about your email that was dropped in the chat. It said only had one T, so double check and make sure.
I clarified it. It's two
perfect.
T's. Yeah, I put it in.
Perfect. And as a Women in Sustainability, thank you. We, of course, will be planting trees in your name. You will receive a certificate from One Tree Planted with your tree and your tree information. We are right now planting trees for the National Forest, so you will help us grow the National Forest. And our last question before we go that we always ask our speakers is, what do you see for the future of sustainability?
Oh, wow. That is a hard question. You know what? I just really am so focused. I have a vision on zero waste. And I think I think that Colorado in particular we're going to transform Colorado. Like, I've been really focused on working on policy along with EcoCycle and others, that will lead to that, several pieces of policy. And so I would really like to see that. I'm going to answer that in terms of Colorado. I think we're going to be a leader in that particular space in the next 5 years. And it's because of this groundwork, all these great organizations and people have put in, and that I've been privileged to be able to work on and champion. But that's my vision. That's what I think is going to happen.
Amazing. I love it. That was a great ending. Thank you again. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We will be sending out the information as well, so you'll receive an email and a follow-up with Lisa's contact information. Join us next month, where we will be talking about finding common ground to make sustainability conversations more relatable. So it's a great transition from talking about this today, and then how you can take this information and talk to those around you. And then our August one will be on Be a Footprint Model, how to model your shrinking carbon footprint. And we'll be announcing the rest of our Community Voices series soon. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise, for all the work you do for the state of Colorado. Please, yes, everybody, a round of applause. Thank you, all of you, for joining and being a part of today's conversation. So thrilled to have you here, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Enjoy this beautiful afternoon, everybody.
Thanks for your passion, everyone, and your advocacy. Takes all of us. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Lisa.